Anyway, it's time for this week's Blast from the Past, which is being brought to us by the International Boxing Organization, where their computerized ranking system is second to none. Check it out, www.iboboxing.com. This week, our Blast from the Past kind of features a sad story. It's former world champion Gerald McCellan, and telling us all about him. Joining me right now is my man, Alex Pierpaoli. What's up, Alex?
Hey, Billy C, how you doing?
I don't know. I'm getting frustrated reading this propaganda in the chat room. I try not to even look at it, but every time I glance over and I see something, it just gets me, my veins start going up. I think, I got to thank nobody here, because between him and GQ, they keep my blood flowing, and I really think that, with all the hamburgers and scotch and all of that I drink, that my arteries would have clogged a long time ago. But thanks to them for getting my blood going and boiling, I think they keep it all moving,
It's a difficult chat room.
It is, and I know.
It's a very difficult chat room. They all have very, very strong opinions, and what they base them on is questionable.
I mean, how can and even you, of all people, I know, and I've seen it myself with you, that you leave sometimes. Do you get
I get very angry.
I know you do.
I sometimes, like yesterday, I make the mistake of engaging, and I should have not. It's best just not. It's like war games. The only winning move is not to play.
Listen, man. And you, of all people, you and you and I. It's not like we agree on everything, but I respect because you research. You're a guy. You've actually taught me, things like something called research things before you open your mouth, Billy C. So I mean, stuff like that. But when I read a statement, and I know nobody here, I know he's an intelligent young guy, I know he is, right? But when I see him say things like it's all about the money and the rankings and the more belts you need, and Floyd is great because he makes all this money, and I guess the Showtime card was great because they had 800,000 viewers, and it doesn't matter if they tuned in and fell asleep and turned it off. It doesn't matter. It's all about money, That's the problem with this sport. And what scares me is if there's a lot of guys thinking like him, we don't have a chance in this sport. We don't have a chance.
I think that's great segments of America think like that. And I think that I was serious when I was saying that he really does have a future in, like something with Fox News or CNBC, one of those type shows, because they present an alternative viewpoint, and basically, for a lot of people, it sounds like an alternative reality. But in their world, I think, his opinion is not that far-fetched.
I know one thing. He doesn't have a future in boxing. Well, maybe he does. Maybe I don't have a future. Maybe guys like him are pushing guys like me out. But
someday he'll be like that guy Jim Cramer on Mad Money, who's like screaming at you, telling you what stocks to buy.
Right. Well, listen, from a money perspective, I can't argue with him, but that's, I guess, where it's the same principles you have when you say, I don't care about the casual fan. You and I disagree on that. I think the casual fan's important to boxing, but it's along the same lines. I still have that. And you know what it is? Guys like us, we're historians. We know what the previous generations of fighters went through to develop this sport, and it's a hurt sport. I mean, like you've said yourself, the object is to render your opponent unconscious. I mean, that's the nature of the sport, and to twist it and turn it in any other way, like, let's put bigger gloves on, let's do this, let's look out, stop the fight, don't let him get hurt, he's got a cut, stop the fight. I mean, come on. Yes, it sounds humane, but that's not what this sport is about. And if it evolves to something like that, they might as well outlaw it. It's the same thing. I'm a NFL football guy. They're talking about doing away with the kickoff return because it's too dangerous for the fighters. And I'm like, man, if they do away with the kickoff, I won't watch football anymore. I mean, it's the same thing. But anyway, unfortunately, we don't have a happy segue to go to here with the story of Gerald McCellan. I just felt that, you know what, Alex? You know why I asked if we should do this, guys? Because I sense that Gerald McClellan and his story is being shoved under the carpet. And I'm hoping that we can remind people, and it is a dangerous sport, and this is a negative outcome, but I think people still need to be made aware of stories like Gerald McClellan.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, like what you just said about how boxing is brutal, I think that even Gerald McClellan and his sister would say to you today, they're aware of that, and that his sister cares for him. Actually, he has two sisters.
Yeah, but one of them got real sick, right? One of his sisters that was caring for him is battling her own medical issues now, so it's even harder for the family. But anyway, go ahead.
But that's the thing about boxing, is that boxing is real, and it does take a tremendous toll on everybody who participates in it on the professional level, the winners as well as the losers, the champions as well as the contenders and the pretenders. And that's the thing about it, is that there's still a place for it in, the old, I'm paraphrasing the Larry Merchant saying, but, boxing is, you can't save it and you can't kill it. And that's the way boxing has always been. When you have a sport that's based on striking another man in the head, another person in the head, that's what's going to happen. But look at there's other sports that have inherent danger in it. Look at the death in race car driving we just saw, or whatever that is, the funny cars that they were doing, the stock cars.
Stewart. Didn't Stewart just?
He ran a guy over, and it looks like a road rage incident if you saw the video. But I'm sure that that they're still discussing it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world today, and I thought it ended with Kelly Maloney, but apparently not. But tell us about
I guess the point I was trying to make was that. Even McClellan, I mean, that's the nature of boxing. We see this all the time, where a great fighter, gets to the top by vanquishing opponents. Well, eventually, that's how he's going to go down, is he will be vanquished. That's usually how it happens. Gerald McClellan did that in his career, and it was sadly done with tragic finality to him. It's a sad story, but again, it's a reminder, and I think you're right, that I hope we don't forget, especially when we saw it happen again recently with the Abdusalamov fight just last fall. So it is something that can happen on any night. We need to remember, and in that sense, I hope we don't ever stop thinking about Gerald McClellan.
Well, Gerald McClellan was a pretty talented fighter that was a brutal puncher. And what amazes me about this guy, and I'll get to this later on when we wrap it up, but for a guy that made it to stardom as a world champion, and who had several successful title defenses before that famous night that ended his career. This guy never even boxed 100 rounds in his total career. 34 professional fights, never made it to 100. His first 24 fights was against what I would call soft opposition, but he only went 10 rounds one time in his whole career, and that was the fight that he lost to against Ben. He only went 8 rounds 3 times. He only won 6 rounds once. I mean, the guy he was such a brutal puncher that he never went rounds.
Yeah, it's true. And for a period, they were calling him the Mike Tyson, the middleweight Mike Tyson, because he was right around that same, the same time where Tyson was fading a bit, and they had, Don King was their promoter. He fought, I think some of these fights were when Tyson had gone to prison. Some of the, like the Julian Jackson fight, I'm pretty sure by that time Mike was in prison. So it was, he was definitely filling the void of the public's appetite for knockouts. That's for sure. But yes, Gerald Allen McCellan was. Well, I just lost his birthday here. He was born on October 23rd, 1967. He fought at middleweight. He had one fight at super middleweight. He was 6 feet tall, and as he was a trainer, he was trained by Emanuel Stewart. He started boxing at 8. His father definitely wanted him to fight, and he was one of 6 children. The family moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin from Freeport, Illinois, and while he was in Wisconsin, he boxed in the Golden Gloves. He won the Golden Gloves 4 times straight. The annual title. He won 4 years in a row. In the amateurs, he beat names like Michael Moorer and Roy Jones Jr. He eventually, like as I said, was trained by Emanuel Stewart and became like Kronk fighter. And actually, I guess Michael Moorer and his paths crossed again. Moorer, actually, that was part of why Stewart and Moorer eventually split, was over Stewart spending too much time with McClellan. But McClellan, like you said, just an incredible puncher, huge right hand, and an amazing left hook to the body. And most of his knockouts are on YouTube, and if you want to see some great fights, they're in his real where he really got launched onto the scene was when he destroyed John Mugabe in one round. That is basically just an exchange. Both guys are just throwing huge blows at each other, and McClellan gets Mugabe out of there in less than a round.
That fight, that Mugabe fight, remember, in that era, John the Beast Mugabe, he didn't get the name the Beast for nothing, I mean,
true.
I mean, this was a guy that first of all, people say that the fight with Hagler, with the John the Beast Mugabe against Hagler, was what Sugar Ray Leonard saw, his opportunity. He saw the weak spot in Hagler. At least that's what Sugar Ray Leonard said. So the Beast wasn't exactly a finished fighter. His biggest problem was making weight all the time. So that was a huge fight for the Beast to get knocked out. And another exchange was the fight against Jay Bell. All of his fights were like that. I mean, when you look at this guy, look at all the knockouts. 31 wins, 29 of them came by knockout. And like I said before, they were all early rounds. He overwhelmed his opponents. This guy was a true... Basically, you can't define it any other way. This guy was a knockout puncher. He came in to take your head off.
Definitely. He was a slugger, very right-hand happy. You could see when he fights, he loved throwing that right hand. His nickname was the G-Man. In some ways he was kind of Mayweather-esque in that sense because he did like part of why it was G because it stood for green. Which green is his favorite color. It's the color of money. He also enjoyed pit bull dogs and was involved in some dog fighting, evidently. I did find, I'll post it in the social media for the show, but there is a really good documentary that seemed pretty recent. I thought I saw that it was 2011 or 2012, but it looks like ITV1 in the UK put it together. And actually includes footage of McClellan and Ben meeting at a fundraiser in the UK, and it's quite touching. But in that, they mentioned some of the dogfighting issue. He was a young fighter. These guys have. That's why. There was all the when talking about Adonis Stevenson, and like you were talking about earlier today about Mayweather, some of the extracurricular activities fighters get involved in. Not all of it is likable stuff, but like I said, that the thing about the McClellan story is that it's reality. No guy. You never expect to end up like Gerald McClellan when you put on a pair of gloves. but I think most fighters are aware that it's possible.
You know, Gerald McCellan was a fighter that just went in there to destroy his opponents, and that's exactly what he did. And when you look at, when I dissected his record, to be honest, his first 24 fights were against what I call soft opposition, and then he got that first world title shot against John the Beast Mugabe, and like you said, destroyed him. Where I couldn't find out is how he lost that particular belt, because that fight was for the WBO middleweight title, and that was in 1991, and then he beat Julian Jackson to take his title away in 1993. What happened with the WBO?
I don't know what happened with the WBO. That's a good question.
And
I don't know. Yeah.
And then I also wonder about when he had the rematch with Julian Jackson and basically beat him worse than he did the first time. He then stepped up for the famous fight to fight Nigel Benn at super middleweight.
Right. He was having a hard time staying at 160, so he moved up. And the Benn fight was his first. Yeah, I mean, talk about cherry picking. To go from middleweight against one of the most murderous punchers in the 90s in Julian Jackson, to then go up against Nigel Benn in your first fight at super middleweight, that's a pretty bold move. Right,
but that's the mentality. You see, this is my argument, and here's the argument that people throw back at me. My argument is a fighter does these kinds of things to prove their greatness. Okay, they think and act outside the box. The negative is what happened. Here's a guy trying to prove greatness. He steps up. Not only does he step up in weight, but he goes after arguably the best guy at that weight during that time, and his life was never the same after that. So it's a catch-22, So the people that say, oh, no, that's too dangerous. Oh, no, you don't want to fight that kind of fight. They have a point, but to me it defeats the whole purpose of the sport. I mean, it's not like that's what got me when Victor Ortiz said no one should take a beating like this. Yeah, no one. If you're a carpenter, if you're an accountant, if you're a lawyer, if you're a computer geek, none of those guys should take a beating like that. But if you sign up to be a pro fighter, I kind of think that that's in the job description. Somebody's got to explain to you. And okay, now if you're going to be a professional fighter, you got these risks that's involved. And this is the reward. You sure you want to do this? And I think Gerald knew what the risks were, and I think that his style of fighting, I think it speaks for itself.
Absolutely, and I think that's. There is this sort of, most fighters do think that at least that was how at that recently back in June when Mike Tyson and Larry Holmes had that little ringside talk there at the Turning Stone Casino at the on the eve of the International Boxing Hall of Fame induction weekend. The moderator asked that about concussions and whether you are affected by your ring careers today. And Tyson said that, I'm sure I've had concussions, but I'm very much aware that when I signed my license, when I was 17 and got my license, or 18 when I got my license, I signed on the dotted line there that said, I'm, risking my life. Now that being said, there's still society. The fight's taking place within society, and hopefully there's going to be rules and people around the fight that aren't going to allow, absolute chaos to reign. And that, of course, is the question, because it is a spectacular fight. It is a horribly tragic fight because of what happened. But that fight with Nigel Benn, it's not without controversy. There's tremendous amounts of controversy, and I think just like the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, the more you watch it, the more you see things that you're like, when you watch it today, knowing what happened, you can't help but think, well, that might have been the punch, or that might have been the punch. Everybody watches it with a different take now that there's hindsight, similar to the Abdusalamov Perez fight. But I do think that there are severe issues that need to be looked at, or at least needed to back in the day, 95 when it happened. And I do think that the British Board of Boxing Control, I would assume they did. I think they, their medical team reacted pretty well, but I think it was a chaotic scene, and it was a raucous crowd and stuff, and you always think, well, maybe if they had been able to get him out of the ring quicker, things would have been better.
Well, boxing brings out the barbaric tone in all humans that watch it. It's like the scenes you see sometimes, based on fact, when people are, they're egging the guy on, kill him, and I'm not talking about boxing, but, it pops in my head, like a fight in a jail scene, kill him, they're egging them on to kill each other. And even the best of people find themselves, wanting to see it too, and it's just something that's innate. I think people just, get like that, and that fight was an example of it, and it was a fight that both people were trying to take each other's heads off, and I think that you alluded to a point earlier. That's not the fighter's job. Somebody else is supposed to be watching out for the fighter, whether it be their corner, whether it be the ringside doctor, whether it be the referee. Somebody else, that's their job, to be ridiculed for stopping a fight too soon, or to throw in the towel, or to do whatever. But the fighter's job, they sign up to fight, because in boxing, what makes boxing different than, let's say, MMA, you tap out and there's no problem with it. Basically, you're quitting, right? I mean, you're tapping out and you're quitting, and the fans will just say, "Oh, he won. So and so tapped out," and that's the end of it. So and so doesn't get criticized for quitting. But in boxing, if a fighter decides to sit on his stool and say, I've had enough, and his corner doesn't stop it, or the referee doesn't stop it, or the ringside doctor doesn't stop it, the battle cry after that from the fans is, he quit on his stool, he quit, and it's just the catch-22, a fighter signs up, he knows the risk, assuming he knows the risk that he's taking, because if he doesn't know, somebody better tell him, and then it's up to all the officials. That's why I was saying yesterday, Alex, that we need, for the sport of boxing, and it's the only sport like it in the world, we need more policing. I believe that our referees and our judges and even our ringside doctors and our cornermen need to go through more training before they're allowed to be in these positions. Right now, yes, judges and referees go through some kind of training, but it's all proprietary based on the commission. So if you're in a strong commission, technically, New York, Nevada, New Jersey, California, they're going to have the better referees and officials, and then you have the other ones. How many times do you see the guy, the Ritter brothers? One time the twin is doing the judging, and then they switch hats, and one guy's doing the referee, and then, because they're all doing the same thing, and they even look the same because they're twins. I mean, we need more policing, and I think that if we have better policing and put the right people in these positions, that maybe the safety issue wouldn't be an issue.
Yes. And
to a degree.
The other thing also is that, you keep them, trained, and you make sure that they're being attentive, and that they keep history in mind of other fights, so that when they see how a fighter is reacting to punches and to damage, that it's not always going to look the same. But if it has some things in common with previous, tragic fights, it's something to keep in mind, and it's something to also, just the amount, like that's one of the things, like you were mentioning the WBF earlier. One of the things that they use in South Africa, and I think in a lot of places on the continent of Africa, they use the punishment index. I think that's a terrific thing that should be used here in the States, where they actually keep a score for how much punishment a fighter will take in even in a win, and we'll keep that in mind, with every time he fights, so that there is some cumulative thought being done that if a guy's had 6 hard fights in a row and he starts taking a lot of one-sided traffic after a couple of rounds, they might be quicker to stop the fight. And again, that's always going to be better than having to look back at it later and say, boy, look how this fight went so long and where did we go wrong? Once the damage is done, you end up having really dramatically and tragically altered people's lives forever.
You're right, and not to get too much on this. I know it's relative to the McClellan story, but listen. Theoretically, no one should know the fighter more than the trainer. And in the Mago Abdulzamov tragedy, John David Jackson's in the corner, and he's they don't even understand each other. They're not even speaking the same language. Did he really know if this guy was reacting any differently? It's those are the guys that have to think safety first. I forget which fight it was this past weekend, because I kind of slept through a lot of the fights. But one of the corners, every time his fighter came, he says, "Are you okay? How many fingers am I holding up?" This was the trainer was making sure that his fighter was okay. I liked that. I liked seeing the fact that the trainer's first questions were to make sure his guy was okay. Then he went on to the next step. Okay, this is what we got to do for the round. Instead of these macho trainers that are so tough for their fighters, and they're treating them like an animal. Yes, the fighter's job is to go in there and knock his opponent's head off. But if you're not smart enough or trained enough to recognize that something's not right with your guy or your girl, that you need to do something. You need to protect that fighter from themselves. And, I'm not saying that could have been done in the Gerald McClellan situation in his own corner. I mean, it's like you're saying, in hindsight, we could have done a lot of different things in that particular fight. But, it happened, and by the way, let's talk about the actual fight. Tell us about the actual fight. I mean, it was a back and forth fight for a while there. Tell us about, how it all ended.
Okay, well, let's start with the trainer, actually, because that was one of the things that I think that is perhaps a factor. Gerald McClellan did not have Emanuel Stewart in the corner at that time. They had split. And it does seem as if it was a bit of a contentious split, at least in that documentary that I just watched, that they made it. There is an interview with Emanuel Stewart, and he does get to a point where he kind of doesn't want to continue the interview. There was some discrepancies about, there were some difficulties, I guess, in their relationship. They parted. The corner was a trainer named Stan Johnson who had, from what I understand, little experience, and from what the documentary shows, it certainly seems he had a little experience. So that was one problem. Emanuel Stewart, certainly, his perspective was that in the camp, McClellan was probably training himself. The other issue was the referee was Alfred Asaro, who is a well-respected European referee. However, he doesn't speak English, and he had 2 fighters who were English-speaking in front of him. The audience was, it was a fever pitch of a crowd, and it's like I said, it's a tremendous fight to watch. It's hard not to watch it thinking of the tragedy. McClellan, as you would expect, tears right into Ben and attacks him, and within the first 20 or 30 seconds, he stuns him and hurts him and drops him, puts him down, and almost through the ropes. Here's the first controversy. Asaro, the referee, starts giving him a 10 count. Now, what happens as he fell, he was part through the ropes and part inside the ropes. As he was getting up, he stepped out of the ropes completely onto the apron. Now, when you're outside of the ropes, you get a 20 count. However, that's if you fall off the apron. That's not if you are just outside of the ropes. So the referee at that point, the fight could have been over in a first-round knockout for Gerald McClellan, but evidently he was counting as a 20. He was giving him a 20 count. The fight continues.
Wait a minute. I thought
it's tremendous.
I thought the rule on that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that only if they fall off the apron?
Exactly right. If they fall off the apron, then it's 20 seconds.
Right.
So he never fell off the apron.
Right. Right. Okay. Go ahead. Finish. I just want to.
So he's sort of getting a longer count.
Right.
Than he deserved, and not just the interpretation of how, from 1 second to 2 seconds. He counted beyond 10 because he thought he was going to 20. Now the fight continues. It's a tremendous fight. Both guys hammering away at each other. There is question that, or at least McClellan's camp, Ben was a wild puncher, and a lot of the punches do land in the back of the head. Was it intentional? It's hard to say it's intentional. I mean, you remember what Nigel Benn was like, the Dark Destroyer. Neither one of these guys are, Mr. Sweet Scientist. They're both bruisers, So you're going to get a furious encounter, and that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Hey, listen, it's I hate to say it, but aside from the knockdowns, it was pretty similar to the Mago Abdulzamov Mike Perez fight. I mean, it was a back and forth, edgy a seat, and it worked that crowd, just like you said. If the crowd wasn't in such a frenzy, and if they reacted a little quicker, maybe some of this long-term damage wouldn't have happened. But everybody just kept getting riled up, round after round, punch after punch, and it was just everyone was jacked up over this, and it's a shame. It went as the fight went on. McClellan looked like he started to run out of gas a little bit. Do you think that fight should have been stopped at any point prior to the 10th round?
I mean, I think that one of the things and when you watch it, you'll notice it does seem very strange. The documentary brings up, and I think very appropriately, that it's a strange behavior. When you watch boxing a lot, there's certain things you see how people react to punishment. It was odd the way McClellan was reacting. He kept blinking. He kept touching one part of his head in the front. And hold on, I'm not quite done with the controversy yet, because there's still more wackiness that goes on. Remember, Larry Merchant always called it the theater of the unexpected. The other thing is that he can't seem to keep his mouthpiece in his mouth. It's almost as if his mouthpiece is too big for his mouth. He's having difficulty breathing around it. So those were two things that were happening. In the 8th round, McClellan drops Ben again. There's also a headbutt that occurs when Ben throws a wild right hand at McClellan and misses the right, but their heads slam together. The headbutt seems to really bother McClellan, and it's after that he keeps touching that area of his head, but there's no cut there. And one of the things I guess that he did say, because finally when the fight stopped, and it is stopped in the 9th round, the 10th round rather, where after McClellan takes a knee and just takes the full count after 2 knockdowns, each time he goes down largely, by his own power. He gets nailed and then goes down. And he is able to stand up and goes back to his corner. You can hear the Showtime, who aired it, Showtime announcers are saying, he quit, what happened? So it was quite an upset win. And of course, Ben and the crowd are going absolutely bonkers because this was just a tremendous victory. But evidently, when McClellan goes back to the corner, he asked for the stool. His corner couldn't even get the stool up in time, and then he just sort of slumped to the floor. his cornerman, this guy Stan Johnson, pours ice water on his head. And I guess McClellan did say, when you did that, it felt like you poured it right into my brain. So the sensations he was feeling must have been some sort of brain event was occurring. And I think that's where, people do need, at least medical people with knowledge, need to look at every aspect and take all the eyewitness accounts and think, well, this is the kind of thing, what is going on here, and these are warning signs, But hopefully, I don't know, I mean, you could argue when you watch the 9th round, the way he's blinking, the way he keeps touching that spot in his head, you could argue that today, I would think, especially places like Foxwoods, their medical staff is top-notch. I think today a lot of guys with neurological experience, or at least knowing to look for neurological symptoms of neurological damage, might stop that fight, because it just seemed that something was going wrong the way McClellan was blinking, and tough guy that he wasn't about to say to his corner, especially a corner that was inexperienced. With Stewart, maybe the relationship would have been such that he could have said, I'm having a problem. And maybe Stewart would have noticed, look, it's something wrong. Right. So it really was just a sad, tragic event.
You're so right about the what we've learned with the medical staffs now. You mentioned Foxwoods; it's the same way. Although they're getting the knock on them with the Abdul-Zumar fight, but the state of New York is the same way. Nevada has a good medical staff. New Jersey has a good medical staff. California. These commissions now, the doctors that are ringside physicians generally on the bigger commissions are neuro specialists, and that's the first sign. When they're shining that light, they're looking for any crazy stuff going on with the eyes. But if there's blinking of the eyes, that's a sign of a concussion, and they would stop the fight immediately if a fighter was blinking their eyes during a fight like that, especially after such a severe clash of heads in which what took place. So I thankfully we've learned from that. Unfortunately for McClellan, that was his last fight. He ended up paralyzed at the time. To this day, he can walk finally, but he is permanently brain damaged. He's pretty much deaf and blind, and like you mentioned earlier, his family, specifically his sisters, are basically taking care of this guy. I mean, he's 24 hours a day of assistance is what he needs.
Yeah, he is able to. I mean, I think he's improved, because there's 2 documentaries. That one is a real short one that ESPN did a few years ago, and maybe it's as much as a decade ago now. He seems improved since then.
Well, he can walk with a cane now. At least. Oh,
can he? Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause even in the UK documentary, it appeared that he needed assistance to walk.
Well,
his sister Lisa McClellan, who I guess is his main caretaker, and it's split with, I guess they do 8-hour shifts with one of his other sisters. And I do think that they're actually having a fundraiser for him in Florida. I thought I saw John Scully mention something about it in the next couple of months, because I mean, that's the thing about it, and this is going to be the case with Abdul Salamov as well. McClellan made $54,000 that night. He got a $250,000 insurance settlement through Don King, I guess, at one point. He got another insurance settlement from Frankie Warren. The thing is, it doesn't even go a portion of the way for his care. His care. You're talking about somebody who needs 24-hour care.
Yeah, and his care, at least the statistics that were based on 7 years ago, were over $80,000 a year, just to keep him fed and being able to go to the bathroom and stuff. I mean, so you don't need a calculator to figure out that, somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 worth of revenue he got between the fights, his purse, insurance claims, et cetera, et cetera. you don't need a calculator to figure out that, since 1995, he's well exceeded those dollar amounts.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a shame.
Yeah, and but for a time, Emanuel Stewart really, at one point, he referred to him as the best all-around fighter I've ever had. And again, he that fight he had with Julian Jackson, the first one, was a tremendous fight. It's and it's unbelievable to watch it, Bill, because it's one of those fights compared to what the dreck that we had to sit through this weekend. To see some of those old Don King cards, if you go to BoxRec and look at that card, he was one of the preliminary bouts against Julian Jackson.
Right.
The card had Chavez on it. It had the main event was Lennox Lewis versus Tony Tucker. It was loaded, and the place is mostly empty for that fight, and it's a tremendous fight. And it's one of those fights where, again, in the first round, McClellan comes out, hurts Julian Jackson, and then in the third round, in the fourth round, Jackson catches McClellan low, and boy, don't ever hit McClellan in the groin because he makes him pay and stops him.
It's so funny because, that's the way those events used to be. A cable event or a pay-per-view event or a closed-circuit event, that's what you got. You got nonstop. You got the best fights you could get. And it bothers me when I see these guys today that are trying to justify the Mayweather card. They just announced the first fight that's going to be on there. What was it? Clay against Bay against Vasquez. In a lightweight fight. That's a snooze fest. The fights just are not comparable. And we don't even get the fights. You don't get Gerald McClellan against Julian Jackson. You don't get Gerald McClellan against John the Beast Mugabe, against Nigel Benn. You don't get those matchups. These guys avoid these kinds of matchups, and the sad part is the fans accept it. And I'm not trying to be barbaric because of what took place in this particular case, but this is what you expect on that stage. ESPN Friday Night Fights, Fox Sports, those kinds of channels. Okay, that's where you get the mediocre fights. That's where you build up your fighters. But when you're paying a pay-per-view, whether you're getting a fight on a premium channel, we want to see these top upper tier fights, and we're not even getting those anymore. It's a shame. But did you do any? Because I want to, we're running out of time. I want to get your thoughts on a couple other things real quick. Gerald McClellan, a tragic story. He is still alive, still suffering. As we said, did you do any title bout comparisons with him?
Yes, I did. I put him in against Gennady Golovkin. And,
Wow.
That, of course, would be a tremendous fight. And he beat him in exactly that, a tremendous bout in which McClellan was dropped in the 6th and the 10th and came back to win via 11th round knockout. Then I put him in against, after seeing that, I said, well, let's see if they fought 100 times, what would happen. And out of 100 times, McClellan won 60 of them, 55 by knockout. Golovkin won 39 of them, 26 by knockout, and they drew one time. Against Andre Ward, Ward beat him by split decision, 115-113 all. And then when I had them fight 100 times, Ward won 84 of them, and McClellan won 14. 5 of them by knockout. They drew 2 times.
Wow. McClellan did get knocked down a lot throughout his career, but he got back up, and I don't know. What a warrior. It's sad to see what happened, but Gerald McClellan, former world middleweight champion, and in his last fight, he challenged for the super middleweight title. Career record, 31 wins, 29 coming by knockout, 3 losses, and amazingly enough, he was only stopped that one time in his last professional fight. Like I alluded to, in the beginning. This guy never even fought 100 rounds as a pro. 84 rounds with an 85% knockout ratio. For a middleweight, perfect size, I thought. 6 foot tall, 77-inch reach. Amazing stuff. And what was even more amazing was the Nigel Benn fight, which ultimately became his last fight, was the furthest he ever went in a professional prize fight, going 10 rounds. Like I said, he had only went 8 rounds 3 times, 6 rounds once, 5 rounds once, never went 4 rounds, went 3 rounds 3 times, 2 rounds 5 times, and 20 of his 34 professional fights ended in the first round by knockout. So amazing fighter, Gerald McCellan. Our blast from the past this week. Great job as usual, Alex. There's not much